in this? Yeah.
Religion.
Oh, religion. Yes. So religion. Mm-hmm. What else? Something I had? No? Yeah.
Age.
Age. Okay. Religion and age definitely, and those definitely intersect with racial identity. Yeah.
With social class.
Social class. Yes. Yeah. Social class. Definitely, that's a big one.
Education.
Education. That's also an identity. Education. Yep. So y'all are on the right path. So a lot of different identities intersect. Immigration is also an identity that can intersect with race, right? So I was browsing through, I don't know if folks are familiar with Undocumedia. It's a really cool like media source.
Yeah.
So I checked out religiously. And today I found a post from Undocumedia from this person, Jennifer Wright. I'm going to assume, but she's passing as a white person, right? So she says that FYI, my parents are both immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. This has come up in my life precisely 0 times, right? And she's saying this as a white person, presenting as a white person. Because it's not about the law or jobs or resources, but it's about skin color. So what Jennifer Wright is saying that she's an immigrant, but because she's a white immigrant, the narrative doesn't really apply to her, or people don't see her as an immigrant because of her skin color, right? So you can see in this quote alone how race and immigration intersect, right? But immigration could be colored by race and racism. The second tenet is that critical race theory challenges dominant ideology. So has anyone heard about this book called The Bell Curve? Yeah? What have you heard about it? Or do you remember? It's okay if you don't remember. Yeah.
That kind of people talk about it.
Yeah. So it's a seminal book in psychology and social sciences where Herenstein and Murray came up with this idea that social status is linked to IQ, right? And so they came up with this concept like, folks in the bell curve have a high IQ and they're like of the highest social class and status, right? And so they made that argument that's linked. But what a lot of people are saying is that you can't just link IQ and social status. You have to think about race, you have to think about racism, you have to think about privilege, you have to think about history, you have to think about resources, right? And so it's a lot deeper than what that is. So critical race theory allows us to think about going deeper. The third piece is critical race theory is certainly committed to social justice, right? So this is something that I'm big on, especially right now during these difficult times with everything that's going on politically. I turn on the news. I turned on the news this morning, and it's like every morning it's that situation when I turn on the news. Like, what the hell? But critical race theory says we have to be committed to social justice in all shapes and forms, right? The fourth thing is critical race theory is it centralizes experiential knowledge, right? And so it means that we just can't take knowledge out of books, right? What critical race theory says is that people, us, everyone in this room, me and you, we have knowledge that's greater than anything else, right? Because we've been through it, we know it, right? And so an example for me is Tupac. So I'm a big Tupac fan, or I grew up a Tupac fan. He passed away for almost 20 years now. But for me, I understood race and racism through books, through my own experience for sure, but I wasn't able to articulate it until I heard the voice of Tupac. When I heard Tupac's songs, he spoke about the person of color and the black male experience. And he talked about how violence decimated his community, right? And really, I was able to connect the experience of people of color to my own experience, right? And it didn't take a book to make me realize that. It took Tupac, right? Like Tupac spoke to me, right? That's his experiential knowledge, right? And so that's what critical race theory tells us, is that people have the most valuable knowledge, not books. Okay. Interdisciplinary perspective. Critical race theory is not just one discipline, so it's not just ethnic studies, it's not just legal studies, it's not just history, but rather we borrow through a lot of different elements. So y'all as health folks, you really have to think about history, you also can think about education, right? All these different intersecting pieces. So with critical race theory, one of the underlying tones is examining white privilege. So question that I'll throw to the group before I go to the next segment is how do you define white privilege? What is white privilege?
Sorry, can you define privilege first?
Part of my question, but yeah, privilege is something that people use to gain benefit, right? Gain benefit and advance in society. So how do you define white privilege?
I would say given white privileges have more opportunities.
Having more opportunities, yeah. Why do you think there are more opportunities?
Have more opportunities because of their surroundings. Color of their skin.
Color of the skin, definitely. So color of the skin can grant social status, more opportunities. Good answer. Anything else?
Someone's like I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll go you first.
I was just gonna say, like, the privilege to not have to think about race, I guess, like, in every aspect of their life. They just can not think about it and not, like, avoid the conversation.
Yeah, that's another element of privilege. You don't have to think about going through life if you're a privileged person. For me, I recognize my privilege. I'm a male, right? So when I walk into a space, I recognize my privilege as a male. For me, working with the undocumented community as a U.S. citizen, I recognize my privilege. Right? And so folks have privilege, but definitely white privilege is something that will open up a lot of opportunities and doors, but people don't have to think about navigating. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's like an entitlement, like it's just part of them, like they own.
So it's an assumption, like, okay,
Yeah.
this world is mine, right? This concept of manifest destiny. I don't know if anyone's heard about that in history books, but the concept of manifest destiny was a concept that folks from Europe used to pretty much commit genocide to the world, right? That it was entitled upon them to take over the world and to colonize the world, right? So this concept of entitlement. Thank you for bringing that up. So white privilege, definitely, everyone, those are really great answers. So it's a system. So think about white privilege as a system, right? Of advantage resulting from a legacy of racism. So it's a system, that's one thing to know. And also understand that it's a system that happened over time, that's happening over time, right? And privilege has been accruing over many, many generations. Benefiting individuals and groups based off the notion of whiteness. So skin color is a notion of whiteness, yeah? The way that people talk is a notion of whiteness. So I grew up in Chino Hills. A lot of my friends were folks of color. But when we would talk, like, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like, why are you talking white, man? You know, like that comment. It's like, even the way that you talk can be a form of whiteness, right? And I had that conversation with my mom, who's an immigrant. Obviously, she has a Tagalog accent. So we have that conversation, like, you know, she makes fun of me because you sound so white. But anyways, that's just an example. So whiteness can be displayed in multiple ways. So I did want to bring up this. Do we have audio?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to show this video that will hopefully demonstrate what I'm talking about.
I'm gonna turn down the music.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, so what you're gonna do is I'm gonna give you a minute to talk with an elbow partner. So kind of just reflect on the video, see if anything of your interest or if there's any reflection that you have in the video. Right? So I'll give you a minute. Go ahead. All right, so we're gonna bring it back. Thank you for sharing with your partner. Any feedback or any comments that folks would like to share about how the video resonated with you, or yeah?
I think this video like summarizes that what's there actually. I mean, all the stuff that the video says, I experienced some of them like, from my daily life, and I think it's a true, goal that we need all to set to make sure that this does not stay for the next generation.
So you're like, let's get rid of racism now. March the door. Let's do it. No, but you were able to resonate with it, yeah. Yeah, I was able to resonate with some of it too. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Else?
I really liked the way they creatively did it, because at first I didn't know what the numbers meant and why they're going up. And then I was like, oh, they got a head start. And so they were able to put down these foundations and provide for their generation, their younger generations. And then while people of color had such a late start. And I feel like that's a common problem. And I talk about it with my family, but they're really, I'm little, they're more conservative. And so they're like, oh, why can't people of color be like other, there's more successful people, but they're so behind, and that's not even their fault that they're behind, so that really painted very
yeah, the notion of a head start. If folks of color were able to benefit from the labor that we put into this country, we'd be billionaires, wouldn't we? But for some reason, we put in labor into the country of people of color, immigrants, put work into the country, but we don't reap the benefits, or communities of color don't reap the benefits. Yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, something that has been with me for a while now is, so my family from Mexico once asked me, so you're an American citizen, you live over there, why don't you have a house here? Why isn't your family like there's some people that go over there and they have houses, they have this, they're like wealthy, and then you guys are like barely surviving, you're like in poverty, how is that possible? And that like angered me kind of, and then I was thinking about it, and this like makes sense that there's like so many barriers and there's so many obstacles that there's not an equal opportunity for everybody to reach the same level at the same time.
Yeah, the concept of race and racism is definitely worldwide, but American race and racism is much more pronounced and it's much more divergent, right? And it's becoming more divergent by the day, even though it seems like it's not. Right? We're actually losing a middle class and it's being more divergent. So one element of critical race theory and race and racism is this notion of cultural deficit theory, right? So kind of like what your family was sharing, like how come, like why aren't you like a billionaire by now? Like, come on. My family sends money back to the Philippines every now and then, you know. But still, it's like, you know, cultural deficit theory is kind of like this notion that it's the individual's fault for not being successful, right? And so what it tells us is cultural deficit theory takes the position that minority students and families are at fault for poor academic performance. So kind of like taking what you said, but translating that into education. So all of this research is on education, right? So it's really putting students of color at fault for their own performance in education. Because their children enter school without the necessary prerequisite cultural knowledge and skills, and parents neither value nor support their child's education. So here's an example of racism, that when a teacher walks into a room and they see a student of color and the student of color has low grades, they say, hey, that student of color is lazy. They don't know what they're doing, and when they go home, their parents they don't care about education, right? What's the counter narrative to that story though? No, what's really going on there?
Their parents are working a lot, so
Right.
they don't have money to invest in their children's education. Like maybe like a white family would go to PTA meetings or be more involved.
Right. So yeah, so that's one example of race and racism, how that plays out in education. Parent might be deemed as lazy, but then in reality, they're working 3 or 4 jobs. Right? Working the graveyard shift. My mom worked at night at the graveyard shift too, right? So I wasn't able to see my mom until, I don't remember, when I was a kid, right? Because she was always working. Right? But it's that notion that it's the student's fault. So you provided a real world example, so thank you. We'll move on from that. So challenges to traditional notions of cultural capital. So this notion that students of color and folks of color, it's really their fault for not being as successful, right? How do you challenge that, right? So cultural capital is an accumulation of knowledge, skills, and abilities that are possessed and passed on by privileged groups in society. We talked about that. It's white privilege that's being passed on over generation, and people have head starts, and it's over time, and you're accruing wealth. You're really accruing wealth. Passing that wealth down. Are there forms of cultural capital that marginalized groups bring to society, that groups of color, that people of color bring to society, that traditional cultural capital doesn't see? And what are those forms? Anyone have an example?
Would it be like a labor that certain minority groups bring into like Southern California with the agricultural and not being recognized nor giving the proper labor rights as like healthcare or having days off or having paid holidays? It often goes unseen, and or also the working conditions that they're working in not being up to code or not being seen. So that would be one way that we're not appreciating that labor.
Yeah, so it's the labor and it's also the knowledge of how to work, how to overcome these situations, these barriers, working many hours in horrible conditions, right? So I really wanted to get into this notion that Oliver and Thomas brought up, this book, Black Wealth, White Wealth. And it's this concept of income versus wealth, right? So when you think of income, it's the dollars that are received from salaries, wages, and payments, right? And so a person can have a high income, and they might seem like they're doing well. But when you contrast that with wealth, it's really the extent of an individual's accumulated assets and resources. So someone could be rich, but also not be wealthy, right? Someone could be wealthy, but not be rich in terms of income. So think of income as how much you're getting paid, but wealth is really the accumulation of resources. And resources could mean a lot of different things. It could mean money, it could mean the labor, it could mean language, it could mean a lot of different things. So here's a point that folks in this book, Oliver and Shapiro, made. They said that the income gap between whites and blacks is actually shrinking, right? That the average salary for the black community is getting closer to that of the white community. However, wealth is actually diverging. How is that possible? Like what you were saying is wealth is passed down from the white community between generations, but the point that they were making that the black community is finally catching up in terms of this generation's income quality. So think about wealth as an accrual of resources. Okay. So when we think about the community cultural wealth of folks of color, of communities of color, think about the array of knowledge, skills, and abilities and networks possessed and utilized by communities of color to survive and resist racism and other forms of oppression. So like for me and my family, my mom had to overcome these horrible working conditions. They migrated across the Pacific Ocean. They maintained their family networks, right? I see that as a form of cultural wealth. My family is powerful. They went through a lot of shit, excuse my language, right? They're survivors. They're immigrants, right? In a world that doesn't like immigrants, that doesn't love immigrants, that hates immigrants. And they're here, and they're standing tall, right? And so they have a lot, for me at least, they have a lot of cultural wealth, right? So think about wealth like that. What are the assets and the traits that you bring, that your family brings, that your networks bring? So here's what it looks like visually. So income and capital and cultural capital, it's really one-sided. It's just like the amount of money that you make. But when we think about community cultural wealth, I want you to think about it in these multiple elements. So we have linguistic capital, aspirational capital, familial capital, social capital, navigational, and resistant capital. A lot of different forms of capital that communities of color carry. So what we're going to do in this next activity is we're going to learn about these different elements of capital. So I'm going to, let's see if we have space here. I'm going to split folks up into small groups, of course. So groups of 3. So I'm going to do the counting. So you do 1, 2, 3. Sorry.
1, 2,
4. Oh, go back to 1.
He's like, wait.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
1,
2.
Okay, cool. So 1's there, 2's, 3's, 4's, 5.
Wait, no, you didn't.
What? No?
Sorry. 3.
Did I mess something up?
Yeah, because you got them into 3 groups.
Oh, I got you 3 go. Okay. 6. Well, I'm the one who can't count. Okay, 6. Do it again. So you're right. So 5. See? You have cultural wealth. I don't.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
There.
There we go. Okay, now we split up. Yeah, 1's there, 2's, 3's, 4's, 5's, 6.
I need a break there. We need a computer.
Yes, bring your computers. Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Ready for your one?
Okay, so there's the open theater. You
How many do you have?
Okay, so a couple tasks now that you're in your group. And don't do this yet. Let me give the instructions first. So first, introduce yourself. Next, cut your paper in half. So you're gonna take your paper and cut it right down the middle. So here's the sticky side up, and just cut it down the middle. Okay.
We have 2 pairs of scissors, so share.
So go ahead and do that first, and then I'll give you more instructions.
Is it okay if we only have like 2 markers? Sorry for the folks getting yellow. Oh no.
Okay, so if you're waiting, Erin, do you want to give the instructions for the reading? It's not a reading, it's a resource guide. It's not a reading. Okay. It's a resource guide.
Reading. All right.
No, I shouldn't have said
There's
that.
knowledge in it. Knowledge container. Okay. So on your Google Drive, under the folder, readings and journal articles. Yeah. So in there, above that, it should be under readings and journal articles, and then week 1. Work 1.
Work 1, edited Yoso. So it looks like this.
Okay.
Yeah?
That's supposed to say week 1. Oh, did everyone get to use the scissors? Everyone has markers?
Okay, so once you introduce yourself, you cut your paper in half. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna assign y'all a part of this capital. You don't have to read the whole thing. So what you're gonna do if you're assigned a part, just read like, okay, I'm in charge of linguistics, so I'm just gonna read linguistics. So it's like less than a paragraph, yeah. Familial, I'm only gonna read familial. And everyone's gonna dissect that, ingest that, and then we're gonna present it back. So aspirational, so we'll go this way. Group 1, aspirational. Group 2, familial. Group 3, social. Group 4, navigational. Group 5, resistance. And then, am I missing one? And then group 6, linguistic. Right? Wait, no one else has linguistic, right? Okay, yes.
What does group 2 have?
Okay, yeah, linguistic.
Also forgive him, he's also recovering from jet lag.
You can't count, I don't know. I know, right?
No.
Does everyone understand what the assignment is?
So, okay, so let me give you one more set of instructions. After you've ingested it, internalized it, with your group, draw on the poster that explains the aspect of community cultural wealth using only pictures or symbols, no words. Yeah.
On both pieces?
Just on one piece. You're gonna save the other piece for later. So on one piece of paper. Yeah.
He said that.
Questions? Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Can't even count.
But if you want to like have an average rate because they know that colleges don't have those. And so students or whatever.
Yeah.
Like how do we get comfortable with spaces? I don't know, something like that. Trying to find like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna show you that.
Like kind of how do you do that?
Give them 5 minutes.
We're trying to figure out yeah, so it's
So we'll give you all 5 minutes. We'll give you all 5 minutes. Yeah.
Skills that
It's nice. Yeah, that's kind of like more of like
Yeah. That's the way. I guess how they said like, so
You meant to get the instructions? Oh, okay. So they just reading navigation and calculus.
Really like how to draw.
Oh, you're right, you're right.
Yeah, there you go. So communicating with
Huh?
Do you all like smiles?
Oh, your sticker. Keep going.
Find like
different ways. It's not just one set way, but it has to be like the same. Not like
It's only one student.
people coming together. For
And how we like
yeah.
I don't see some like how we have
Do we need more time? Like 2 more minutes? Okay, so you're gonna present back to the group. So you're gonna pick someone to present for your group, okay? Okay, so we're gonna give you 1 more minute to finish up your drawings. And we're gonna start with aspirational. Who's aspirational? Not yet. 1 more minute, 1 more minute. Okay, 20 more seconds. Doesn't have to be perfect.
This is not a graded activity.
Does it? Well, everyone's overachievers because everyone's in grad school, so everyone's like, I want to. That's like the worst thing. Telling a group of grad students, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so we're gonna bring it back. Everyone here is a brilliant artist. We all respect each other's work, right? Okay, so we're gonna start with aspirational capital. So for each group, your representative is gonna talk about the capital and what do you think that means and how your group symbolized that in your poster, okay? So, aspirational.
We came up with this girl. She's a dreamer, and she this represents the school, and her going to school, and her dreams are to graduate and after graduation pursue a career and go up kind of the social mobility ladder staircase. And so that's kind of, and also like in the background of our parents separate when she was a kid, and that helping her go through the process. So our aspiration is to get education and also get work.
This one you can post it on the wall. Okay, familial?
Okay, so familial is like the social and personal experiences a person has before they enter college. So we have the family here, they're loving, they're supportive, they're hand-holding. Everyone has their own stories. We have a book. Everyone has their own stories and experiences, and then we have like the environment, so like the home, like a park, or whatever, and the welcome mat for like, welcome everybody. And the plus sign is like positivity. Positivity.
Social capital?
So we have social capital. So social capital is connections that a student uses before attending college or navigating through college. So we drew a cell phone. So like for us, it's easier to like text our friend or call our friend rather than like maybe we feel intimidated to walk straight to an office and ask someone that we don't know. So we use our peers. We talked about like the mentoring programs that are for first generation college students and how important that is because it's less intimidating for someone to ask questions, or maybe they just don't know what kind of questions to ask, and that person can help them through it. So we have all the social media stuff like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat that our generation also uses, and we find information through there. And we also drew this one, which is the side.
It's the club for psychology, like Psychi. For example, it's kind of using clubs as like a way to help other students, like students helping students to kind of, like she said, navigate through college. And if you have any questions about your peers, your career path, yeah, you use clubs for that.
And finally, we have like a building which represents any sort of community. So for example, like church or any other clubs or organizations that students use as connections also to find out about resources.
Navigational?
We have navigational capital, and you basically did compasses. I think this path is just different curves, and each group has potholes in it. Can't really the potholes are in pencil, but in each pothole you have like our staff and professors and faculty and counselors that are just guiding you in the right direction. They're supposed to be telling you, keep going that way to avoid like that pothole, that difficult obstacle on that path through 6 up the little treasure chest up there. And just each compass here has like the things you need to succeed, which is knowledge and of course some kind of money in there. Then you have like positivity, like happiness and family, just support with family and friends. It's just guiding you in the right direction towards success there.
Ray, can you put it on the wall?
And you can start to see how these pieces of capital build upon one another. So aspirations, family, social capital, it all helps to build navigational capital and so on and so forth. So resistant?
Yes. So it took us a little bit of like understanding this capital because what it encompasses is communities of color coming together for a social justice. And it talked about how college students or people within higher education come back to these communities and empower them to not only advocate for equal rights, but also for equity when it comes to health and other sorts of social injustice that are happening in these communities. So we decided to draw the help of Patricia and Georgina. We thought about what should we draw? So we did a fist from Black Lives Matter. In addition to, it's not correctly drawn, but it's what's happening right now in the borders with our families and separation. And we put a giant, like, let's stop this from happening, of kids being separated from their families, in addition to people or students of color who are graduating and coming back to these communities around the world and empowering them to continue the social justice fight, whether it be here at home or back in their countries. And that's what we understood from this. Hope it's correct.
There is no right or wrong answer. But I like what you're saying. And I will snap to that. It's like a poem. And then lastly, linguistic.
So what we drew here, the stick figures. So this one is saying that students of color have more skills in reading facial expression and memorizing, so they're able to read other people's expressions more versus someone like down here. I don't know if you can see it's like yellow, they're like looking just at themselves. So students of color have like they're able to unite more with people and like read their expressions and who they are. All of that.
Yeah, I think all the posters are great. They're perfect. They not only represent what's defined by Yoso, the theorist, but also how you internalize it, how you define it on your own, because your own definition, your own experience, like I said, is much more valuable than any theorist, right? And so I see that the posters are just the reflection of that. Yeah. So moving forward, how might we find a community's cultural wealth? Now I'm just gonna talk about this concept of community asset mapping. So really understanding once you get into a community, and you're only gonna understand this because once you become professionals or educators or whatever field you're gonna go into, you're gonna really wanna work in the community and understand if it's the community that you come from, you might have to relearn it because you've been at Cal State Fullerton or an institution of education for a while. If it's a new community, you might have to go in and really understand the people, the culture of the community. When I worked at a nonprofit, called Search to Involve Filipino Americans. We did a tobacco cessation effort where we made sure that youth under 18 weren't able to access tobacco. So we did a community asset map of Baldwin Park. And we found out where youth were buying tobacco. We were going to liquor stores. We were finding community leaders, and we did a total asset map of the community, did a campaign, and we were ultimately able to, through organizing and activism, we were ultimately able to pass legislation that will ban folks under 18 to access and buy tobacco, cigarettes. So that's one way to do it, right? You really have to assess the community through an asset map. And so multiple ways that you could look into the community and see what type of capital that the community has is organizations. So what kind of organizations do we have? What type of individuals are there? Are there leaders? Are there elders there? Is there that's sort of unique culture that's part of the community that you're going to be working with, right? Is there art? Is there theater? Is there poetry? In Baldwin Park, right when I was leaving, there was a big, is anyone from Baldwin Park, by the way? 626? San Gabriel? Okay. So when I was leaving, there was a big poetry open mic scene that was coming up. That was one thing that they brought up. Education, so is there a university there? Environment, is there community gardens? Is there liquor stores? What's up? Businesses, yeah. What type of businesses are you using? what type of businesses are the community using, right? So asset mapping is a process to find out what type of assets and capital and wealth exist in a community. And you have to think about that as you become professionals in wherever field that you go into. Yeah. Utilization is getting those assets and then utilizing those assets in a positive way, either bringing them into your schools, your classrooms, your workplaces, if you're going to be a health practitioner one-on-one, or if you're going to be creating health programs, really utilizing health programs around the value of the community that you're working in. So what are some examples of community cultural wealth in your neighborhood or community, now that we think about it? So take a minute to think about think about where you come from. Right? Think about what are some examples of community cultural wealth that exists in your realm from what you've experienced. I want to hear some examples. Yeah.
So I'm from South Key, and although I don't spend much of my time in South Key, I usually spend more time here in Fullerton, but something that I think is cultural wealth in my neighborhood is that every 3 months we have a disposable area in the park where you can dispose of like your batteries, hazardous waste. In addition to that, on the side of that, they also have like a little health fair, and then outside of that, they have like a pet clinic. And I think having those 3 things at once, it benefits the community at large because they know that every 3 months we'll be having that. And I think that's an asset that brings together not only Parks and Recreation, but also different members of the Council of Southgate to come together to create that event. And I think that's something that my neighborhood has that is of cultural wealth.
Wow, that sounds like a really dope event. Can I tell? With the recycling and the individual health, right? And then pet care?
Yeah, they have $10 rabies.
So pets, that's a really big capital stress relief, right? But taking care of pets is part of relationships. Any other forms of community wealth that folks like to share?
I live in Los Saigon, which is kind of like the community's conclave, and so every year we celebrate Lunar New Year, and we have a tent festival and a tent parade. So it's down the street, really near my house, and it's nice to see everyone. Like, even though we see each other every day, but like this is the time where everyone from all over the states come to celebrate this really event. Yeah, I've been to a couple of Lunar New Year festivals, and they're really awesome. It's also thinking about cultural wealth in the space of Southern California, where everything's so spread apart, and you rarely see community. To come to an event where there's multiple things going on, or like a festival, and to build community with people that probably live down the street from you, but you don't really see, right? So that's part of a cultural wealth, where a community comes together, culture or traditions or purpose, right? That could be part of it too. So other examples of cultural wealth that exist. So I'm a Dodgers fan, so folks heard about Chavez Ravine, right? It's a Dodger Stadium, but people know about Chavez Ravine and the history that it was a barrio, right? That folks were uprooted because they wanted to build a stadium. But if you dig deeper, you really can see that Chavez Ravine was a barrio and it had a lot of cultural history and cultural wealth. This guy, John Normark, wrote a whole book of the cultural wealth of the barrios of Chavez Ravine. And so he has pictures of like what the neighborhood looked like. Anyone been to Dodger Stadium? Yeah. So what the neighborhood looked like today, it's kind of like it's like a big inverted dome like right here. But before that, there was a community there, people, of lives, of narratives, of friendships. Kids playing. Right there in the back, you have City Hall, the fog. Downtown LA would be like right here on this side. Right, you have folks connecting across boundaries. Right? So that's an example. Another example, I love Undocumedia, so I'm going to keep pushing Undocumedia. But our friend Yosimar Reyes is a really dope poet as part of the undocumented community, and he pushes for this concept of cultural wealth in the undocumented community. So he created this. Well, I'll let the video speak for itself, but he's an artist and a poet, and it's really good if you haven't heard about it.
I love my undocumented people. I love us because every day we wake up to a country that hates us. We wake up, give thanks to God, and go to work. Watch the news, hear how our own TVs vilify us. We change the channel. Pray that tomorrow will be a better day for us. When they give us a little breathing room, we make the most of it. We're so grateful that often we forget we deserve better. That all this mess is not our fault. We stay low on the radar. Want peace. Want to exist without the added stress of having to be public about where our spirits ache. We just want to go to work to feed our families, yet we become scapegoats to a system that is addicted to exploiting the poor. I love my undocumented people because the way our spirits are toyed with, you need some unfathomable strength. I love us because we have constantly had to prove our humanity and constantly done it beautifully. Because to stay human under these conditions, you have to have an understanding of beauty. I love us. Even when our stories are manipulated and exploited, even when we are presented as gloom and doom narratives, I love us. Because at the end of the day, somehow we always manage to make something out of nothing. I love my undocumented people because being undocumented is not political, it's not physical, it's a condition created to keep us from smiling. Now look at us, thriving.
Yeah, if you haven't heard about Yosimar, he's really cool. I'm a big fan, but definitely check him out. But that's an example of how cultural deficit, specifically around immigration, can be portrayed. Folks who are undocumented can be portrayed as an individual deficit model. But someone like Yosimar Reyes is really providing the counter narrative, showing that there's really cultural wealth within his community, right? Within the undocumented community. So that's something that's really been trending right now, especially with everything that's going on. So for the final activity, what I want to do is I want you to think about community cultural wealth, and I want you to think about your own practice as healthcare practitioners or future healthcare practitioners. And I want you to envision what a practice would look like using community cultural wealth, right? So get in your trios with the other piece of paper and envision the practice of healthcare with a culturally relevant community cultural wealth model. What would that look like? Like, what would that feel like? How would the patients receive that? How would practitioners embody that? Right. So think about that. Yeah.
Do they have to stick with the one they were assigned earlier? Can they use all of them?
Oh, so you could use any one of these. So you could use community wealth, like if you're thinking community, so organizations, individuals, businesses, educational, or you could look at it individually, which y'all presented earlier, aspirational linguistics, or any type of cultural wealth. So think about that. We'll take you until the end. So we'll give you about 10 minutes for that one.
Music at the beginning. goes down slightly. Yeah, I think that was the same quote that I used to like several times ago. Yeah.
No, and it works on like both ways, yeah. Like, that's what when you first start.
Any questions? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, or like just.
I could draw like yeah. There's like over here, like cars. Yeah.
Like a little afterwards,
It makes more sense.
I did
Yeah. And so it's just like a small, reach their own people. Yeah. Like, no, you have like a, like trees, you have like a park, just represent like a park.
Okay. So like, oh, yeah, I can write that. We were like, we do these guys.
like what they need.
All right, 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Those arms You're like some or you know how you yeah, so it's clear where maybe with the yellow. Just like black. Oh yeah. Yeah. They have it, yeah.
All right, 30 more seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, we're at time. Sorry. Just finish up your last drawing. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so you hear me clap once? You hear me clap twice? You hear me clap 3 times? Okay, thank you. So I went over time, so we don't have enough time to present everyone. We do have time to present, have 1 or 2 folks who want to share your posters, if anyone's so inclined to. Why are we pointing? We're pointing fingers? Okay, we got 2 groups today. We got 2 groups. We'll go with this group first. So this is your vision of how healthcare would look like with a community cultural wealth model.
So for us, we actually use the same family. So we are creating like the supporting environment. So there is a church where I know there are some of the churches that offer like language classes or like some of the workshops or like learning new things and like creating a like, you know, they can make friends, they like other family can hang out together, just building that connection. And then we brought like ambulance here, tiny ambulance with I know some of the churches like organizations, they offer like free clinic, free checkup, those kind of things, and also like doing the fun things too, like we do roller coaster. So fun things like for entertainment, like so just creating like an overall supporting environment for the family.
So 2 takeaways from that is bringing healthcare to the family, to the community, like in the church where people are at. Also making healthcare holistic. So not just thinking about reactive medicine, but also proactive, like stress-free, preventative stress relief and fun, right? That's part of healthcare. All right, last group.
We did we did a little person, lost person, and then a magnifying glass. So we take a better look at the person and seeing what they bring to the table and who they are as not just like a random person, but who they are. Intersectionally, yeah. So we did lips for language, socioeconomic status, like this representing where they come from, like homes, where they feel safe, like knowledge, and then we did a flag without anything in it because like where they come from, representing like culture, and just like the idea was to get a better view of who the person was when we're like working with them.
Oftentimes, as practitioners, patients can be distilled into just the problems, yeah? And especially if you see patients over and over every day kind of get jaded to like, okay, what's the problem? But I think it's important to remind us that healthcare can really look at the person and really see them as people and humanize them, right? That's what healthcare is supposed to be. It's supposed to humanize people and humanize the world through health. So thank you for that. There's one other takeaway for me. I mean, community culture wealth, definitely that's the main takeaway, that we have to understand people for who they are and where they come from and understand the histories. For me, like I mentioned at the very, very beginning, community cultural wealth got me through grad school. So I know everyone here. So I'm just giving you, so now I want to transition to me giving you my blessing as a former grad student. And y'all about to enter grad school. Grad school can be definitely culturally deficit place and space and dehumanizing space. And so this is me just speaking from my experience and from my heart that every one of you bring your own cultural wealth. And as soon as you start that program, connect with someone in that program that's going to be your partner that'll get you through, right? Connect with your family. Make sure your family knows what you're going through, your friends. because my own community cultural wealth got me through my program. There were many times when I could have and probably should have dropped out of my program. But if it wasn't for me recognizing my own wealth, I wasn't able to get through. But I was able to get through after I recognized it. So just want y'all to know that y'all bring your own forms of cultural wealth, and y'all will get through it. I'm so happy that you're going to begin this journey. It's such an amazing experience going into grad school. Y'all are going to be so fantastic, and you're going to be the health educators that we need to change the world. So thank you very much for having me. I left my email here if you have any questions, or there's going to be a copy of the PowerPoint, online already. So I'm excited for your grad school and also excited for your summer program. So thank you.
This is the point where I would be handing him a thank you card. Just pretend that happened. But thank you so much, Mike, for getting us started with this program off on the right foot, recognizing what each of us bring, right? A lot of times, as Mike mentioned, we are socialized to think that we don't have a lot to bring to the table, right? There's a lot of self-doubt, there's a lot of questioning. We'll talk about imposter syndrome later, but like a lot of, am I really supposed to be here? And so hopefully with today's session and throughout the rest of the program, we will help to validate that, yes, you belong here. You are supposed to be here. We want you here. Your community needs you here. Hopefully you want to be here soon. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to stop this. Bye, Marina.